This is the End of the Road podcast with your host, Michael Coco. Exploring the horizons we never touch because we're already there.
Welcome, and thanks for listening. Tonight we're once again off to London, England, to speak with Britain's leading scholar of Western Esotericism, that being Tobias Churton. Would you believe that he's got 28 books either published or in the works? What an accomplishment. This one we're focusing on is his new release called The Books of Enoch Revealed, subtitled The Wicked Watchers, Metatron, and the Fruits of Forbidden Knowledge. This book has been praised as nothing less than an academic and spiritual tour de force, and in my mind it's really a one-stop shop for everything related to the history of Enoch and Enochian thought throughout the ages. But of course we wouldn't expect anything less from Tobias, and without further ado, here's Tobias Churton to unpack his wonderful new release. So what do you think it is about the Book of Enoch that has been resonating with humans over the ages? I mean, why does it keep popping up at all times?
I think the first reason it's always had a special place in certain seekers' minds is that, of course, Enoch, according to Genesis, is one of the earliest human beings, seventh in line from Adam. So you're going way back before Moses, way back before Abraham, and the intrigue was based on the notion that if this book could actually be obtained, one would attain what used to be called in the Renaissance the Prisca Theologia, which means the ancient theology, the original understanding of man's relationship to God and the cosmos. So the book had always this sense of untold promise, but it was only known for so many years in fragments and only known about by very few scholars in the Western world. It had in fact disappeared from Western Roman Empire by about sometime in the 5th, 6th century. It just vanishes. Nobody knows where it is. There are quotations in it, which were recorded in Byzantium after the fall of the Western Roman Empire. But all they did really was to intrigue people about what was missing. What people didn't know until the 16th century, sort of time of the conquistadors, was that we're not quite sure how long, but in fact the Book of Enoch, as it came to be known, had been part of the Bible in Ethiopia for as long as anyone could remember, and was placed next to the Book of Job. But in those days, nobody could get to Ethiopia very easily. Right. And if they could, they probably couldn't read the language in which Enoch had been translated, which was Ge'ez, the written language of Ethiopia. So it has all kinds of intriguing elements, but I think partly it's because of its supposed antiquity and because it was a lost gem.
Yeah. So what about the idea of sort of the apocryphal nature of it and sort of what it perceives to sort of describe? Is that sort of something that you think is important?
I don't think scholars who are seriously engaged in the study of the Enochic literature, because there's all sorts of elements to it. It's not just one book. And that one book is not one book. It's a collection of different treatises. But I think they would not be impressed that it wasn't worth studying because it had been called apocryphal. And there are two meanings of apocryphal. And one, the original meaning, was a secret book, which had come from a source that was suspected. That's one meaning of apocryphal. The other meaning was that it had no authority in the church. But we know that in the Epistle of Jude in the New Testament, Judas, possibly the brother of Jesus, not Judas Iscariot, but Judah, his brother who's named in the Gospel of Mark, quotes from the book of the Watchers, which is an important component of Enoch. And he quotes as an authoritative description of the coming of the judgment of God to the earth. And most early fathers of the church were content with that. They said, well, if it's good enough for Jude, it's good enough for us. If he believes it has authority from God, it has. This is the only quotation from a prophet in the entire Bible, Old and New Testament, that is not actually in the Bible. All other prophecies can be found in the canon. Micah, Jeremiah, Isaiah, Ezekiel, Zechariah, Obadiah, you name it. They're all can be found there. Here we have this quotation in Jude, and the book to which it refers, confidently, it's a big part of his message, is not there. And there were several reasons for this. One of which was that some rational-minded people said, how could this Enoch book survive if it was written before the flood? It would have perished in the flood. And then another church father would say, well, not necessarily. It might have been packed aboard, or Noah might have memorized it. So, and who are you to say whether it was there or not? Other people said, well, the Jews themselves, they're talking about the rabbis who dominated Judaism after the collapse of the temple in Jerusalem in 70 AD. Many of the rabbis didn't like it either because it represented a brand of Judaism which they were suspicious of, namely apocalyptic literature. And whereas in the Christian church, a great deal of the Christian message then and today is apocalyptic in nature. That is, it's about revealing a supposed time plan that God has always had in mind, so to speak, for judgment and purification of his creation. So it was a bit funny of Christian teachers to claim the Jews as being on their side. But as it was a work of Jewish literature, they said, well, if some of these Jews don't like it, then, but the fact of the matter is it was perfectly obvious to study that these texts were hot texts in the period and education that Jesus would have known and was familiar, certainly it would have been familiar to his general background. It was a popular text and much imitated. The book of Revelation, which is you can hear quoted from one end of the Americas to the other, as if it was the only book, is very largely influenced by the writings in the Enoch literature.
Yeah, and you kind of had a little bit different spin on that I've got on the book, and I had a quote that you said, when justice seems remote in present circumstances, that there's a turn toward apocalyptic visions. Mm-hmm. And I thought that was sort of a unique sort of twist on the way I had thought of apocalypse or apocalyptic visions before.
I think that's, well, the whole point, the word apocalypse means literally in Greek apocalypsis, to bring out of hiding. So what the apocalyptic writer is saying, everything may look evil, everything may look bad. The righteous people may be oppressed, and the rich and the wicked dominant. But worry not. This is all part of a plan that has been pre-made, and you can be confident that this period is going to end in a glorious justification of the righteous and the utter condemnation and execution of the wicked. So, of course, it's going to be popular when you're looking at people who feel profoundly uneasy about what's going on and fearful of the future and feel helpless. The idea being that God's got his eye on all this and he's going to, imminently. And one of the great things about reading the what's called First Enoch, the first major collection of Enochic texts, is you can see this apocalyptic worldview that's now quite familiar to many of us. You can see it in gestation. You can see it in its early stages. You can see it being born, grappling with all the different issues of where evil came from. Why does evil seem to triumph? What's going to happen to the trodden on people? How do you cope with these huge empires and powers with armies that crush? You've got to remember, of course, that the Jews had been through one invasion after another, and every time it looked like things were getting better, they get slapped again. And the formation of the Enochic literature mostly belongs to the period when Judea was being fought over by two powers, the descendants of Alexander the Great's generals. You have the Ptolemies in Egypt. Cleopatra, the famous one, was a Ptolemy of Greek origin. And you had the Seleucids of Syria. And in between, and poor Judea was stuck in between these rival descendants of Alexander's generals, and suffered greatly under Antiochus Epiphanes in the 160s BC. He actually banned Judaism altogether, forbade its practice, made priests eat pork, and erected an idol, a pagan idol, in the temple. And that, of course, caused a massive revolt led by Judas Maccabeus, who retook the temple in, I think it's 164 BC. So it's this literature, and the Book of Daniel is another important apocalyptic text. It's coming out of this period where it seems that this is the last straw for the Jewish people and their religion. Is this the end? And the apocalyptic writers are saying, it will be the end, and it'll be a good end. Don't you worry. You're heading for a golden age. Where have we heard that before? This is all going to be absolutely fine. Trust in this vision. And of course, people did. And there's a lot of this apocalyptic in the New Testament. And it's in certain circumstances, it's become the dominant aspect. I remember there's a wonderful German theologian writing in about 1600, later than 16, about 1640s, and he says these apocalyptic visions always generate more interest when, he says, the church is slowing down. In other words, what he meant by that was it's losing its spiritual integrity and is getting cold feet and attack of the heebie-jeebies. Then the resort is to, don't worry, help is going to come from above,
Yeah, and
a lot of people, that is their faith. Constitutes the Christian faith for them. The notion that the evil won't last; it's going to be removed. That constitutes the message of salvation. But there are other ways of looking at it, of course.
Yeah, you want to discuss, since you talked about the Enochian view of evil and sort of the Watchers. You want to dive a little bit into that?
Well, it's fascinating. There's a theologian based in Michigan, a very fine scholar of Second Temple Judaism, and he takes the view, more or less, that the Enochic literature has a completely original theory of the origin of evil, quite different to I won't say mainstream, the other dominant Judaism of the Second Temple period. Second Temple period, we're talking, should we say, the 300 years leading up to the Christian period, where the Jews have come back from Babylon, and they've a new temple, and so on. So he says that this idea of the Watchers, there's a line in the Book of Enoch where it refers to Azazel, the leader of these wicked Watchers, bad angels, who've come down and taught men how to fight, how to deceive, how to in all the black arts, you could say, what a breastplate is, how to make better weapons. All this comes from the wicked Watchers. And there is a line in Enoch, and he says, to him, Azazel, ascribe all sin. Azazel is a kind of Satan-type figure. He's possibly a component of later ideas of, the absolute evil one. Satan, anyway, isn't a name. It's a description of a job. It means the adversary, which means prosecuting counsel in God's court. And the original idea of the Satan is somebody who serves God as his prosecuting counsel, so sort of a heavy lawyer, somebody you don't want to get mixed up with, but he's still serving God in that period. Azazel, however, is a rebel angel who's come with all his mates who've sworn a pact on Mount Hermon that they've seen human women, and up in heaven they ain't much of that about, and they see what's going on earth, and they are so swept up with utter lust that they compact to come down and have their way with the women, and this produces the Nephilim, is the Hebrew word, which has various meanings and interpretations, some quite extraordinary. But you've got this idea that that evil only corrupts the world because the Watchers came. Otherwise, it was pretty good. It seems an extraordinary view to hold about that all evil in the world came from the Watchers, because, of course, according to Genesis, before this happened, you've got Abel is murdered by Cain, and you've got the disobedience in the Garden of Eden. But people in this who are interested in this field in 2nd century BC, 1st century BC, they need to know that this evil has a recognizable source, and that it has to be recognized that this evil cannot be dealt with by human beings because it comes from a higher world, and therefore they are dependent on an intervention of the supreme God into the world to deal with this evil. And that is the helplessness that is in the apocalyptic scheme. Man can't do it through his own will, because he's been what these wicked angels brought was miscegenation, which is the perversion of the stock, so that the influence of this wickedness comes through all humanity, and the knowledge that they taught, the wicked knowledge that they taught, despite the flood, according to Genesis, having wiped away so many of the evils, somehow it's still there. But we can't get it. We haven't got time to get into where the flood narrative originally comes from. That's another fascinating thing in itself. But there is this idea that what God had made has been corrupted, and it was corrupted due to a prime corruption in a higher world. And that's the fact that is a sort of original idea, because in the legal writings, which Christianity has inherited, the Mosaic Code, the only evil is done either by God for his own purposes, or by manipulating other nations to invade Israel or Judea when they're naughty, or when they're disobedient, or mostly it deals with the evils that men do. They tell lies, they commit adultery, they steal, they murder, they make war, all of these sins. So Enochic literature is very interesting. It's looking for a cosmic answer for why this evil is so powerful. Why does it persist? Why is it can't be just dealt with in the individual? So in that sense, that's a very original. I think Boccaccini, isn't it? Gabriele Boccaccini is the professor I'm talking about, who has this idea that their idea of evil was unique to Enochic literature. I think it's a powerful recognition. It's not it's not consistent through all the Enochic writings. However, most Enochic writings presume that if people repent, not necessarily repent, but in some writings, repentance is a dominant thing. If they turn again from their ways, they can resist condemnation in the end. They can avoid it, but it's very hard. And you look at this period immediately before Jesus' time. You've got debates within sectarian Judaism, which were how sectarian they were. It's difficult to say. But does man have a good and an evil angel? Is he all bad, or is he part bad and part good? And how does this actually work out? Because they were grappling with the problem of evil. This is reflected very strongly in the Enochic writings, and then they're having a great struggle with it. And we are still today having a great struggle with the idea of evil. Liberal philosophy in the 19th century started to imply that, it's not as simple as good and evil. There are aspects that we call evil that maybe come through our evolution, that are learnt attitudes, part of our makeup, that come from a time when certain kinds of behavior were necessary for survival and so on. We're still grappling, is evil an absolute, or is it just things that are bad? The Greek word for evil is kagos, which is just generally means bad, in the sense that, my dinner was bad, or, that fish was bad, or, what a bad environment. It doesn't necessarily mean this kind of cosmic, spiritual, absolute black force, the evil empire, it permeated with a darkness that is impenetrable and, that sort of thing. But we haven't worked it out, I don't think. You've got socialism, which says, well, evil is generated through social structures. If certain kinds of social structures encourage evil, a more simple kind of way of life, live on the plains, simple, not too many people around, you get less sin. Put people together in cities and their behavior changes and you get more evils and so on. What we need is, in the 60s, you got the move out to the countryside, Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young. If only I could go back to the pioneer days where life was much simpler. You had the good book and you planted your seeds and hopefully God so on. And of course, then come the carpetbaggers and shoot them up and the outlaws and the so-called Wild West and all this. So you see this evil thing, it's always there. It's a motivation for why people are religious, and it's a motivation for why people reject religion, because they're not satisfied with the explanations that the different churches offer.
And the other sort of aspect of that that you point out in the book is that this sort of the need for the messianic vision to address the deliver us from evil, so to speak.
I know. I can feel what you're thinking when you're saying it. Absolutely, deliver us from evil. I mean, this is it. That's the key. One of the key lines of the Lord's Prayer, isn't it? Deliver us from evil. And, for thine is the kingdom. It's not mine. It's thine, and we are but instruments, and so on. What can you say?
What about this? What Enoch was shown in the vision. Do you have a sense of that? When he's actually ascended, about God's plan and the evil and the ethics behind it, perhaps. The morality that's.
What's the actual question? I can't quite figure that statement into.
Well, sure. I mean, you draw some parallels in the book to the Messianic Jesus figure, and
yes, he could almost be Enoch, couldn't he?
Yes.
Do you remember that scene in Mark when he goes to Dan, which was known at the time as Caesarea Philippi, and Jesus says to the disciples, "Who do men say that I am?"
Yes.
And I think Peter replies, well, some say you're Elijah returned, and some say somebody else. And I often wondered whether the somebody else was Enoch, because there is this, you could always, if you read First Enoch from a purely Christian perspective, which they did and do in Ethiopia, it's obvious to them that the ultimate redemption is Jesus, and that there is, in the later in date part of First Enoch, you have a whole, it's called the Similitudes of Enoch, the section is, or the parables. You are introduced to a figure that is fascinating because we hear about it, but nobody really knows what it means, is a figure called the Son of Man. And the Son of Man is actually a title in Enoch, and he lives with God, and he's kind of like God's right hand, Son of Man, which means Son of Man seems to mean something like he's like man, he's like a man. The origin of this term comes, we think, from the book of Daniel, where Daniel is visited, he says, basically by an angel, who is like a man, meaning like a son of man, i.e. a son of man, and Adam means a human being. But this son of man figure reflects the glory of the Lord in heaven. And Enoch is introduced to him. And at the end of the similitudes, it almost seems that, in fact, as far as we can tell from the story, it's more than implied that Enoch is made into the Son of Man. And in a text called To Enoch, he's completely transfigured into an archangel, such that when he comes to earth to see his son Methuselah, he has to have his face frozen because the glory of heaven would be too much and damage mere earthlings. There's even an Islamic picture of their Enoch, which is Idris, with a huge veil over his head when he's talking to his son. So it's the same thing. He becomes a being that is a supernatural being altogether. And in third Enoch, he actually becomes what he calls Little Jahveh. That's the name of God. He's right hand. He's God's absolute emissary. Now, in the Christian world, this is a messianic role for Jesus, no question about it. So it's almost like the Jesus mythology of Jesus' messiahship and its connection to God's court and will, my Father's will. Was it I and my Father are one, and so forth. This is prefigured in these Enochic writings, and it's my own belief is that Jesus was very familiar with this text and recognized himself in these writings. And I'll give you an example of that. Now, a lot of theologians are perplexed today about how to explain to ordinary Christian believers about Jesus' anti-demon ministry. What was all that about? What's this casting out of demons out of the madmen of Gadara, and the demons jump into the swine, the pigs, launch themselves off a cliff? Can't he destroy the demons? Who are these demons, and what's this ministry all about? Well, if you read the Book of the Watchers, the explanation of that and other aspects which are familiar to us now become clear. The idea in the Book of the Watchers is when Enoch condemns the wicked watchers for having sex with human women and producing these giants, thousands of feet high, who start to eat human beings and everything they can find. They're monstrous, absolutely monstrous. Absolute miscegenation. Complete mixture. The heavenly mixing with the human and producing something horrendous.
Yes.
When these are destroyed by God's will, would appear to tie in with the flood narrative, that somehow the flood wiped them out in the Enoch use of the flood mythology. But of course, because these beings have the heavenly spirit in them and are immortal, they can't be destroyed. They can be disembodied, but they can't be destroyed. So they have to be put somewhere. And it says they go to the dark places of the earth. They're put in chasms, but they can congregate around certain areas. So you can imagine in the old world, if you find something like hot springs, volcanic activity, deep chasms, caves, the natural tendency would be that's where they're at. They're in that. See that smoke coming out of there? That's your. And these demons, if people weren't careful, these Nephilim could jump into your soul and take you over and send you mad and make you do evil things. So this, to me, satisfactorily explains Jesus casting out of demons, a technique he also taught to his followers. Because he said, we're up against things, we're not just up against principle, we're not up against the Roman Empire, we're up against spiritual evil. This is something that goes back to this primal catastrophe that's happened when the wicked watchers corrupt mankind, right at the beginning of the human story. And if you wanted a moral objection to the Enochic worldview, if that's permissible, you could say, well, since this catastrophe of evil happened to the first people, why does God let it go on so long? Such that here we are now, over 2,000 years, well over 2,000 years after the belief that this was all about to end. We're still suffering the predations of evil. And we're still being told, "Oh, don't worry, it's all leading to something." I mean, I remember when I was growing up, a teenager, there used to be a magazine in England that was financed by an American, very, very wealthy American, called The Plain Truth. Always beware of the word truth on the cover of anything.
Or plain.
Indeed, it was a very expensively produced magazine. It was issued free. I don't know. I presume my dad spoke to somebody, and were put on the list, and these were distributed all over the world. And this magazine, some listeners may remember this, basically interpreted the recent news in terms of the Book of Revelation. So everything that was happening, which was the 70s, the Yom Kippur War between Israel, Egypt, Syria, all of that it's all in Book of Daniel, it's all in the Book of Revelations. I remember at that time there were only 7 members of the European Common Market, now the European Union, and these, of course, were the 7-headed dragon in the Book of Daniel. You were constantly reassured that everything was going to plan, but don't trust these wicked powers, but it's all going to end. I don't think the magazine's distributed. I'm sure the old chap who ran it's probably died, and maybe his posterity weren't interested. But these beliefs are very, very deep rooted, and all over the world now. More so, certainly in America than in Western Europe or Great Britain. But they're there. They're always bubbling underneath. The newspapers can't live without apocalyptic. Everything that happens has to be. The word apocalypse is used totally mistakenly as being a disastrous thing. The apocalypse in all of the original writings is something to be fervently hoped for and expected. And in that sense, the Jehovah's Witnesses are quite right to look forward to it in terms of the logic of it, because it is a revelation of God's concern for the good and his determination to wipe out evil. And I find this Enochic vision has so many positive aspects to it which help us understand the religion and faith that has sustained Western, not only Western, by any means Western culture, sustained cultures for the last 2,000 years. But it does leave open some very serious questions about how we interpret events.
Yeah. Or it's, that our view is of the divine say more about us than the divine.
This is a point I make in the book that, there's this wonderful old expression of Hermetic philosophy, as above, so below, so that the world reflects a higher order. But I would say when it comes to producing religious myths, it's as below, so above. When you've got religious writers in the ancient world writing about what's going on up there, they're projecting what they're familiar with. So God has a court, he has ambassadors, he has emissaries, he has servants, and these are sent out. And this is exactly how an Oriental court would operate. You've got the same in Mesopotamian religion. The behavior of the gods mirrors the behavior of potentates in the world. And so there's always this people, they say anthropomorphize. People see divine activity very much in their own terms, very much so. And of course, it's then possible to make the terrible link, which you get all too frequently, where an individual decides that they are an ambassador, they are part of this great plan, and therefore they can do no wrong. They have been assured by I think to most of us, these things are too big for the human mind and too big to resolve. We can think about them, but we can't resolve these issues. We don't know where evil comes from if we think of evil as a thing. We can talk about it as a process, or if you're Hitler, you say, what do you mean by evil? It's just survival of the fittest. That's all that's happening. And people, living beings will do what they can to make their lives easier. The line of least resistance, as nature always follows. Watch a river, follows the line of least resistance. It doesn't matter if there's something in the way. If people get flooded, that's what water does. There's that sort of the naturalistic interpretation removes the moral dimension of evil. Is as well. It's just nature.
Yeah. One of the other characters you have lurking about the books and the history is Metatron, which
Yes.
I thought that was sort of another spin on sort of the Son of Man motif.
I think he is really another version of the Son of Man figure in the Enochic writings. We shouldn't jump to conclusions and think that the Son of Man references, by the way, in the New Testament are just the same concept.
Right.
I think there's nothing in the Enochic writings about the Son of Man has to suffer and rise again.
Right.
So but clearly, the word Son of Man, which appear in the Gospels and never appear in Paul's letters, interestingly, they belong in a thought world that is held in common. People must have understood what Jesus was talking about when he referred to the Son of Man. And my guess is they would have understood it more or less into Enochic terms. But then Jesus shocks his disciples by saying, it's not like you think. He says the Son of Man actually is going to be killed. And Peter at Caesarea Philippi, according to Mark, actually attacks Jesus. I can't live with that notion. How can the Son of Man be held by the powers of this world? That's absolutely what he can't face. So that's very unique to the gospel Son of Man. But the Enochic literature carries on anyway, and Gershom Scholem would say that it's really at the origin of Kabbalah, Jewish mysticism. And by the third book of Enoch, which is very impossible to date accurately, but it was probably around by 800 and may have been around in the 2nd, 3rd century, maybe. We've no evidence for it. Our earliest manuscript is 17th century, in fact, which is very late for a manuscript. But in that, Enoch is Metatron. And it's a fascinating name, Metatron. It sounds like science fiction to us.
It does.
Do you remember the movie in the 80s, Tron? It's a kind of...
Yeah, exactly.
And of course, because it sounds Greek, which some say suggested that's its origin, Metatronos, meaning by the throne of God. I don't think that's the origin of the word, and there's a lot of study on that. But you have there a persistent myth. I once contacted by accident a lady who I thought was somebody else, and I said, "Are you so and so who I used to know?" And she said, No. I run an organization where I get inspiration from Metatron.
Yes.
I thought, who is this lady? So it's living in the south of England somewhere. And she said she felt she'd been contacted by this archangel who gave her moral and spiritual guidance. Absolutely fascinating. I said, I'm sure I asked her, where did you get this idea of Metatron from? That was something I read, There's a very interesting anecdote of spiritual ideas generating other spiritual ideas. Now, Metatron in the 17th century comes into the writings of Robert Flood, who we think was involved with early Freemasonry in London in the 1600s. And his view was that Metatron is Christ. And the Jesuit philosopher Marin Mersenne wrote specifically against this, said this is absolutely wrong. But what Flood was thinking, Dr. Flood, very brilliant man, what he was thinking was that this Metatron is really like the Logos. If you're familiar with John's Gospel, starts with the Greek enarche ho logosin, meaning in the beginning was the Logos, which is translated the Word. But it doesn't mean a word or the word of God as a writing. The Logos is a Greek concept for the intelligible aspect of God, the intelligence, if you like, that sustains the universe. And if you Isaac Newton used the Logos to explain gravity. People said, but why does this gravity exist? And he said, if you took Christ out of it, it wouldn't work. So He believed that Christ is the universal intelligence which sustains the universe. Now, that is a Metatronic concept, there's no question, because at the end of the Enochic corpus, Enoch 3 Enoch, Metatron has exactly that role. He's the one sustaining the whole thing, and he's responsible for it, and he's God's emissary. And as I say, in Christian mystical circles, there is this link, for those who care to see it, between the image of Metatron and Christ in his cosmic sense, sustaining the universe, sustaining it, not destroying it.
Right.
So very interesting. I think if you want, if you're really serious about trying to understand the formation of Western religion, and especially its more esoteric and I'd say probably more deeply influential side, I think esoterica is fascinating, not because it has millions of adherents, but because the few adherents it has are extremely active in the world. Because it's how can I say, it's a bit like how many people get a decent university degree? Only a few, but they get to quite high positions. I mean, how do you get to a high position in the world? Birth, money, education, sometimes luck. Sometimes you get somebody who feels inspired, and then affects other people. They sort of, this person has something, charisma, which means a gift. So I think the esoteric ideas of Enoch have been and are influential.
Yeah, there's something about that idea and about ascending and being shown and encountering things. Like, yeah, I was just thinking about, this is like that you are exposed to a non-ordinary state of reality and bring it back kind of thing.
Very much so. And in Kabbalah, in the medieval 13th century, 12th and 13th century Jewish mysticism, they had a thing we now call Merkava mysticism. The Merkava is the divine throne, which is also a chariot. The throne of God has kind of wheels. So they thought of it as a chariot. And that's obviously linked to the idea that chariots link earth and heaven as well. But you could enter into a trance, meditation, and ascend inwardly to higher heavens. And you still got that idea. St. Paul refers to it in Corinthians, that he says he knew a man, might have been himself, who went to the third heaven. And he says, whether in the body or out of the body, I know not. I have to say, in the book, is it in this? No, it's the book I've just finished. I talk about my own experiences of this, though I know that this can happen, these ascending experiences. And the only important thing is you must never make the mistake of believing everything you see. I know that's difficult. For the simple reason it has these experiences have more conviction than any other experiences you'll ever have. But the trouble is they're all framed according to what we already think. In other words, if the framework of your thinking is sane, then your conclusion will be sane. If on the other hand, but then again, there is the sense that spiritual dimensions actually have an inbuilt security. In other words, if you're evil of intent, you won't get through anyway. However, I do believe it's possible for people to have these experiences, but completely misuse them. I presume that's possible, since all perversions are possible. But I don't think one should start preaching on that basis, although that is in fact what's happened historically, isn't it? People have an ascension experience. They encounter what they think is a hyper real being or beings. And you've got the same today with the all these religious ideas are being projected onto aliens and all this stuff.
Right.
People think they've been taken up in a craft, And the von Daniken was really messed this up with his idea of the fiery chariot of Elijah was a flying saucer or a spacecraft of some kind, and the Nephilim, which are mistakenly identified with the actual angels, not their offspring. These were obviously creatures from another world who brought knowledge that man didn't have. What you've got to say is nobody thought this until NASA, science fiction in the 20s and 30s, and the whole mentality we have today of we think we can go to the heavens in a spacecraft, and so we think that way. They didn't think that way 2,000 years ago, so they weren't talking about those experiences. Why was it a fiery chariot? Well, in those days, the most august way to travel, and the one suitable for kings, emperors, and powerful people, was the chariot. And what does flames do? When you light a fire, what happens to the flame? It always goes upwards. So naturally, if you wanted to say means of transport between earth and heaven, fiery chariot, of course, naturally.
Yeah, and we have one that goes through the sky every day in the morning.
Now we take fiery chariots completely for granted. Now there's another thing, isn't it? I mean, here we are living in this world where most of us don't even understand the science behind what we're using, like this computer. We don't really understand it. Maybe you do. I certainly don't. And we don't really. If you said, could you make a supersonic aircraft next week, you wouldn't know quite where to start. You might ring Boeing if you're taking some risks. But, how do you do this? But we're now faced with a world with so much knowledge that is not in our possession, that it is becoming more tendency to ascribe knowledge to extrasensory sources. So in a way, it's a way of dealing with our helplessness again, to have this alien idea, I think, And again, you have the messianic thing that they're coming to save us. Calling occupants of interstellar craft, sang the Carpenters back in 79, I think it was. We come in peace for all mankind, which is the very words Neil Armstrong took to the moon. Suddenly these aliens are coming back with the same message. But I remember before the wall came down, Berlin Wall, I was in East Germany, and I went to an exhibition of their arts culture center in East Berlin. And it was an exhibition of Russian paintings of UFOs. And there were all these quite naive paintings of meeting aliens. There's a huge belief in this across the USSR. And what was fascinating was that the craft all looked like they'd been made in Moscow in part of their space program. But every aspect of the picture was religious. They were icons. They were describing heavenly beings. The projection onto the science was their mystical religion that they inherited from their Orthodox tradition. It was fascinating to see these ideas working on minds that perhaps were not sophisticated sufficiently to see how people's visions are dependent entirely on the culture that you're raised in. If you take an ordinary mind to a higher level, it's still an ordinary mind.
Yeah. That's kind of depressing. Never mind.
I just think that these activities should carry a health warning. That's all.
Yeah, no, exactly. Well, so when I was reading about the Watchers in your book, I wasn't thinking that they were aliens, although I'm sure that you could a lot of people
explains a lot of the interest today, doesn't it?
Right.
In Enoch, you're saying why have people been interested in it, and I was talking about historically. But if you say why today, well, obviously
it's
because
the Watchers
looking for it, but they're also looking for a fresh prophetic revelation. So that explains what's the fears that people have got now. Obviously, and anything which can try and make super sense of these things rather than the kind of sense you get from the news, which is every day is another slap in the face. But if you have a cosmic understanding of what's happening, you can calm down a bit. And these works offer a certain amount of cosmic understanding, or at least what settled people's minds 2,000 years ago and occasionally since. I haven't gone to think, I mean, it would be interesting to write about what kind of reassurance would really be powerful today to people's fears of the future and powers of the present? What would it take now to reassure people? And I think Steven Spielberg pretty well did it in Close Encounters. It would have to be a massive vision of technological supremacy dressed in a message of peace for all mankind, and that would just about settle our. But in the absence of that, we have the Books of Enoch and our own intelligence.
Yeah, I couldn't help thinking that the Watchers, rather than aliens, were almost like egregores or something. That they would come in and possess, like the luster. And I don't know. I was just thinking that. I wasn't looking at it literally. I was looking at more archetype as archetypes, and I don't know if that's. I mean, that's a product of this age too, to look at it as an archetype.
Well, we don't really know. I mean, we obviously the term watchers, by the way, is quite a late use of the Aramaic in terms of Jewish literature. The phrase used in Genesis 6 is the sons of God. The sons of God who live in his court. They're the ones who descend upon the women. But the phrase in the Book of Enoch seems to come from a bit later, maybe. Genesis is usually dated around 500 BC. It's obviously a compilation of different sources. And the Books of Enoch are the individual parts are distinct and not so mixed up as you get in say, the Book of Genesis. But where did they get this idea of the watchers? Well, obviously a watcher is looking down, so it's associated with the light from above, obviously. And it seems to me to be an almost natural step, especially, I think, after the Jews were in Babylon, because there they would have been introduced to the most sophisticated astrology that was around in the Middle East at that time. They'd have been very much aware that earthly events in Babylon were the result of stellar movements. So things happen here because the position of Venus or Mercury in relation to the sun, and they'd have heard of that. That was so much part of the religion of the Babylonians. I think it made a big impact on the Jewish minds who were strung out there as exiles. I do think that notion that beings from heaven could disrupt life on Earth it really does sink in, I think. And I don't think it was necessarily originated in Babylon, but it emphasizes it. Also, you've got that idea in the Book of Daniel, written at about 160 BC, when he talks about, he meets an angelic being who's like a son of man, meaning he looks like a human. He obviously isn't, but he looks like one because man is made in the image of God, and therefore, Jewish belief was that our basic facial bodily characteristics are reflections of God's own form. However blasphemous that might be to some people, that's the basic meaning of being made in the image of God. That's what it means. It means we're like that. Not the same, but like. And I think, I don't want to lose my thread here. This figure who meets Daniel then goes off to where he says he's going to meet the Prince of Persia and I think the Prince of Greece. What he means by prince, the word prince is an English translation of the Greek archon. An archon is a spiritual power, possibly in the Gnostic religion, an evil angel in actual fact. So the idea was that these Nephilim, these spiritual powers, had actually become worshipped by the peoples of other countries and constituted their gods. So the gods of Greece, which oppressed Jews, the gods of Persia, which had oppressed Jews, these gods were in fact evil princes, and they're going to be dealt with by God's emissaries. They can't be destroyed. Now, this is a key thing as well. You cannot destroy the descendants of angels because they are come from a life immortal. So they are thrown into eternal fire. Now, we have many people for hundreds and hundreds of years have grown up with the Catholic and Protestant condemnation that all sinners, of especially bad sinners, will be thrown in an ever-burning lake of fire. This idea of the ever-burning has nothing to do with a kind of nastiness about sin. By nasty, I meant in the English sense of nasty, by the way, which means it's something horrible. But the only way to keep the spiritual evil under control is to keep it permanently under fire. Permanently under fire. Now, when this idea of the judgment of the watchers is extended to the judgment of sinners in general, then the poor sinner ends up in an eternal lake of fire. And it looks like pure sadism. God must be some kind of sadist to want the eternal punishment. But it was a misunderstanding. They didn't realize why it was endless fire for the watchers. But the idea of hell as ever-burning fire translates into the punishment of the wicked. And then there's a fascinating little influence, I think, of Enochic literature on people's conception of hell. And that I've never met anybody who understood that before. And that's why the Gadarene swine become the next home of the legion that Jesus casts out, because he can't destroy them. They can only be taken out. That's the exorcism. They can be removed from the person, but they've got to go. They're going to go somewhere. So he sends them into a bunch of pigs who throw themselves off a cliff. What happens to them after? I don't know. Presumably, people would keep away from the bones, because they're there. They're there. So that place would have been. It might be an etiological story, which is a story that's told to explain why a place has a particular significance. So, that was where Jesus cast out the Gadarene demons. And that's why people won't go there. It's a little creepy. Some bad thing there, Don't go in that house, because they were in there as well. He used to live there. You can imagine the folk stories will be told about this. And I think all those are very, very ancient feelings that people have about places that are haunted. What are they haunted by? Evil spirits. It's the Nephilim again.
Yeah.
But the trouble is, anybody can point the finger at anything and say that's spiritually evil. And, human beings being all sinners, as far as we're told, everyone's pointing the finger. It's very easily done. It's their fault, And I love that thing of Jesus condemned this judgment thing. And he says, before you look at the mote in your brother's eye, look at the beam in your own. And I think should silence people who make too many huge judgments about other people. Look at your own sin first. You may find it's bigger than you thought, Squire.
So you mentioned that you had another book on the way too. I mean, you're always up to mischief. You've got like one book after another. So is there another one after this, or another one you're working on?
The next book is my title for it was Heaven: The History. But publishers seem to think that there are too many books with the word heaven in. I wanted to explain the whole history of our conception of heaven right through time. And as far as I knew, nobody had done this. And in all cultures, I don't just mean Christian, Jewish, or Catholic or Protestant. And I cover the whole thing: Eskimos, pre-Columbian civilization, African, Far East, Chinese mythology, Greek, Persian, everywhere that I can find, Polynesian, Australasian, all the ideas of heaven that we know about from literate cultures, and what we can glean from the archaeology of pre-literate cultures, Stone Age man, so-called, and all those things. I thought it would be fascinating to bring all this together as a story and say how, our ideas about heaven that we've all inherited one way or another, are they held in common? Are they universal? Why are some different to others? And why do we condemn some people to go there and others there? All this stuff. And again, just to show people the facts that we know at the present time about where our hope lies. Everybody wants to meet their loved ones after we lose them, because loss is unbearable. So it's not about does heaven exist, although at the end I do a little peroration on that line of the John Lennon song, Imagine There's No Heaven. My conclusion was actually it's easy to imagine there's no heaven. It's imagine there is one, I think, is getting more difficult. But it requires a lot of imagination now to think that there is a special reward for the good, because we feel beset by a permanent state of crisis where nothing ever seems to get settled justly, and people promise that it can be settled and just give me 10 minutes, I can do it, or a day. Doesn't happen. We're stuck with the problem of being in this world. And one way we've dealt with this problem is our ideas of heaven. And so I thought it seemed a natural step from doing Enoch. Maybe it's the ultimate, maybe it's my last, it might be my last sort of adult book. Maybe I'll have to start writing children's stories next, and was it Jesus said, unless you be as these little children, you will not enter the kingdom of heaven. So maybe I need to go back to kindergarten now.
That's in Zen too. It's a simple mind.
Childhood, yes.
Yeah.
I thought it was a nice. It's my 28th book, commissioned book, and I do think 28 is whatever symbology one might see in the number. Seems to be enough.
Well, at least if you're a good place to start at heaven, but then, as below, so above. So
absolutely, that's in the book, and I really wanted to understand. People talk about Plato and the philosophers. I wanted to get to grips and put it all clearly for people who don't have the time to read every blasted source. So you could get this is a one-stop book on heaven. You want to know what people have always thought about heaven all over the world. There's your book.
Well, that's how you write, though. This book about Enoch's the same way. It's how people all over the world, all different ages, have made use of this. That's what's so great about it. It's a one-stop Enoch stop.
That was the idea. Yes, I'm saving people a lot of trouble.
That's right. It's for people too busy to actually do the research yourself. You've already done it all for them and put it all together in a nice little package.
Hopefully it will inspire some minds to do their own research, and that
exactly, or as your little explorer that you start the book with, somebody to go back and try to find more.
James Bruce, the amazing explorer who brought back the first copy about the time of Captain Cook discovered Australia.
Yeah. He must have been a character.
He was. My goodness. He's well worth reading his books.
Yeah. Well, Tobias, if people want to find out more about your 27 or 28 books that are around, what's the best way that they can find out more about you and your offerings?
I have a website called, predictably enough, tobiaschurton.com. And all my book, I think a very large number of them are available with Barnes & Noble and Amazon, and you can find out about them there. I think I put reviews, some of the reviews on my website, and there's a background to where I come from, as it were, and what my career to date, that sort of thing. That's all on a very modest website, because I don't feel the need to trump my own wonders. I leave that to people to find out for themselves. We have this phrase, and you probably have it in America still. I don't like to blow my own trumpet.
There you go.
Yeah. So people say, well, how can you find out? I said, well, okay, if you must I've got a website. Yeah, I have got a website, tobiaschurton.com. But if you're interested,
Yeah, that's right.
yeah, and there's a lot of stuff I've done. There's all sorts of podcasts and things on in the internet world.
Yes.
Don't get caught in the internet, as I was.
Right.
Yeah, the best thing about the internet was when it started. It had an atmosphere of freedom about it that was quite new, and I've noticed over the last quarter century that it's becoming more and more an oppressive kind of force that's distorting realities. And it's probably all predictable. But again, it's the human mind projecting its problems onto anything that moves. You know?
Yeah. Well, like you said, when the religion loses its freshness, it goes apocalyptic. So it's like that's the same thing with the internet.
You got it perfectly there. Yes, absolutely, Michael. That's the problem.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Tobias. Yeah. Well, thank you very much. It's always a pleasure to talk with you and visit your one-stop shop for whatever you're studying and writing about. And I appreciate your time, and I wish you best of luck. And I definitely would love to have you back when we visit heaven together.
Yes, that's a good one. Thank you, Michael. Thank you very much for asking me onto your podcast.
Yeah, thank you, Tobias. Have a wonderful weekend, and I guess it's I guess no.
It's midweek, but I'll try and have
midweek. Yeah, sounds good. Thanks. Bye.
Bye.